Thank you, everybody, for joining up. So my name's Jeffrey. I'm a software support research support specialist at Reant. So to begin, I'll talk a little bit about who Reant is. So as it sort of says on here, we're a Crown-owned member of organization that provides a centralized platform for e-research, infrastructure, expertise, and services. So we allow um, we are here to help the researchers to do their research, in particular. For the HPC side of things, we provide an HPC service that allows you to do high performance computing on our network. And we are here to enable Aotearoa's research, innovation, and education sectors to achieve greater success in their endeavours. And we have lots of members and partnerships, including universities around the Motu, public and independent research organisations, as well as other waianga museums, libraries, and government organisations. So we provide quite a lot of different services, including networks and connectivity services, network protection, federated identity and management, access management, high performance computing, as I talked about before, training as well, which is particularly what Nisha is involved in quite a bit. We have consultancies where Alex and Chris and a few others are involved in, which can help you to streamline some of your workflows as well as integrate machine learning approaches into your work, as well as data services that we provide, such as Globus and others. So let's begin with containers. So I'm assuming that everybody here has sometimes had a little bit of problems when you get onto a computer, you're trying to use your service, you're trying to use your computation the way that you want to, and then you find, it's not working exactly how I want it to. And that's because one computer isn't necessarily the same as another. This is where containers can sort of come in, because a container is like a little mini computer inside your computer that takes sorts out all of your software needs from inside the computer. So why would you actually want to use a container? Well, there's a few reasons why you might want to use a container for your work. So let's just say that you have your software and you find that it's not very portable between computers, i.e., you have your researcher from somewhere else says, oh, I've got this software, it's working perfectly on my computer, and you say, oh, I would like to go and do some work using that same software. You then bring it over to, for example, Mahueka, and you find, dang it, it's not working exactly how I want to, or it's coming up with lots of problems when the user on the other end says, oh, but it just works for me. Well, this is one place where containers can be very valuable because it allows us to be portable. So you can take your software from one computer, move it over to another, and generally it works as expected or as you want to. It helps for reproducibility of results, so from now and in the future. So often, particularly in science, we want to be able to take our research and go, okay, if somebody else wants to reproduce it using exactly the same parameters, can they do that? Containers allows us to be able to do this, taking scientific workflows, published results, and being able to reproduce those results. Often you want to isolate your software from environment drift. So what does that mean? Well, often as time goes on, we often update our environments on our HPCs, whether that is in updating versions of compilers or other softwares or so on and so forth. But your software might only be able to work with a particular type of compilers, particular types of underlying softwares, and you want to keep that consistent. Well, containers allows you to build all of those compilers, all of those softwares from within the container itself, and it's its own little mini environment that says that, okay, I want to run this particular types of settings and software, and it just ignores everything outside of the outside of the container. It doesn't worry about what's going on inside the computer itself. Just says, okay, this is what's installed in the container. I'm going to just isolate myself to what's going in there. And because of all of this, it makes it really easy to collaborate because you are not worrying about trying to get everything exactly the same from computer to computer. You sort of get that as a part of using the containers. And something else that's really important as well is as along with the isolation and everything is your dependent management. You don't have to worry about things depending on other things because everything inside your container is already installed to be um, uh, already have those dependencies already sorted out for you. And something else that can be really nice is that once you've got a container, you can move it over to another place and you don't need to worry about installations. It just sort of works a little bit like an app on your phone. It just comes out of the box ready to use in many cases. So, as I mentioned before, a container is like a computer, a little mini computer inside a computer. And another way of thinking about it is it's a little portable lab space where you have all of your tools, you've got your chemicals, you've got your equipment that's laid out exactly how you want to, and you can move that lab from one place to another. So a container is a little bit like that. It's like a shipping container, as it says. Every that is how you want it, and you can sort of pick it up, move it somewhere else, plonk it down and go inside, and everything can work exactly how you want to without having to muck around too much. So there's different types of container software, container programs that are around. You might have heard of Docker and Singularity as some of those. We use Apptainer, which is a version of Singularity that's designed specifically um, for HPC environments. So how if you want to get your hands on a container, there's two main ways of being able to do this. The first way is that you can have what's called a def file, which sort of identifies all the ways that you want to build your container, how you want it to run, and you can build it directly from the HPC itself. So it's a little bit like, so this def file is this recipe that allows you to build your container. Alternatively, you can pull a container straight from the cloud. So, for example, from Docker, you could do something like Docker. If you wanted to pull Ubuntu straight from the cloud, you could put Docker colon // Ubuntu, and that would pull it directly from the cloud. And like I said before, you wouldn't have to install anything. It just pulls the file, and you can go ahead and use it directly. And you can pull specific environments or specific softwares from the internet as well, which is a little bit what I said before. So maintained containers exist for many common tools. For example, if you wanted to pull TensorFlow, you could pull this directly as a container from the cloud, and it would be ready to go up to the standards that TensorFlow wants you to use or has designed their software to be used. You can then run the containers, and we could potentially see that later on in our demo. We have three ways of doing this, but two are shown here. The first way is an interactive use, which is Apptainer shell. And the way that this works is a little bit like if you were to directly write things in the terminal. It's exactly the same way. So you could write echo hello world, it would pop up hello world. You could go XYZ do this, and it would go ahead and do it straight away. Alternatively, you can run what's called execute mode, where it's just a one-liner or many liners put into one, where it executes the lines directly without having to be interactive. So you sort of got this interactive and non-interactive use of using containers. You also have a third mode called run, which is Apptainer run. And that just works exactly how the user wants you to use it. So what I mean is if you go Apptainer run your container, it will run the algorithm as it has been set up by the maintainer of the container. There are sometimes cases where you need to use outside resources. So, for example, GPUs is one of these. This is easily done in containers where all you have to do is put your dash dash env and you can use GPUs just like that. You also sometimes will want to use MPI for your programs, and there's many ways that we can deal with that as well within containers. One, can be a little bit tricky because your MPI containers inside and outside the container need to be the same. So this is one part that can be a little bit tricky, but we can always help you with that at Reand. We can always help you with how to get that working. And something to remember is that a container abstracts your software, not your hardware. So what I mean by that is at Reand, we use AMD CPUs. So any container that you would want to use needs to have been set up for running for an AMD. So that's another little caveat to containers that you'll need to remember. There are also other options besides containers, such as virtual machines, Conda environments, SPAC, and Python virtual environments. They all have their pluses and minuses. Containers, again, are really good when you just want to take your program that you're set up and be able to move it from one computer to another. So that portability way of doing things is really nice. Particularly when compared to a virtual machine, which is also quite portable, but is quite a lot heftier in that it's a much bigger sort of it requires much more resources and space to run. And last words about containers is that containers are becoming increasingly attractive for federating computing environments. So, i.e., if you want to build if you want to run, this is a little bit what I was saying before, that when you want to run your container on other platforms, it can be as easy as just submitting your platform to a cloud and it moves that container onto the computing service that then runs it. So we're sort of becoming a little bit like that potentially in the future. That's sort of open. Cool. And that's pretty much everything that I wanted to say. The last thing that I just will quickly mention about containers is that containers are pretty straightforward to get you an idea around. So, for example, I've only just started working on containers and I've only used them for about 3 or 4 months. So they're pretty okay to sort of pick up, and definitely something to think about about getting into. That requires not too much effort to learn too much, to get started and get going. So with that, I'll hand off to Jen.
Cool. So Jeff's covered containers, and a lot of the workflow options out there will take advantage of containers to move software around. But there's a few different reasons that are pretty similar to why you might want to use containers for using workflows. So the main one is that it allows you to be reproducible. Instead of needing to run every step of your process for processing data manually, and remember to run all the commands the same way, you can connect them in a structured manner so that it all runs the same if you were to repeat it without you needing to remember every individual step. Another thing that's really helpful is that it allows you to run serial code in parallel. So you can basically spawn up a ton of processes doing almost identical tasks to do things like parameter scans or just do the same processing on a lot of input data. And one thing that's really nice about workflow management tools is they will basically make certain that you are only running the tasks that are actually necessary. So you can often use them with like resume functionalities. They know if something has changed and will only run sections of code that have changed. So you're not reusing all of the same resources if you already had your code partially working. So if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to talk through a few different workflow patterns that come up in research and that are very useful with workflow tools. So the first one's sequential. If you just need to do a series of tasks, A, B, C, and D to data, very simple workflow, very linear, but something that if you're doing those same set of tasks for different samples, or once every blue moon, it can be helpful to have those all in a structured manner so that you're not needing to recreate the process every time. Another common workflow pattern is concurrent. So if you just need to do the exact same process to a whole bunch of different samples, you could spawn up a bunch of different tasks simultaneously to handle the exact same process for all of those samples. And then you start getting a little bit more complicated. So one thing that's fairly common is doing some scatter patterns. So you might have, an initial data set that you split, and then you're doing a process on different portions of that data set, whether that's just, dividing data, subsampling data so that you can, more efficiently use resources and whatnot. But you might do this and then do the next step, which is a gather. So this is a pretty common combo, is a scatter gather. So you start out with some initial data, do some prep, split it, do some analyses, and then rejoin the data to compare the results of all of those separate analyses together. And then one other one I'll discuss here, and there are tons more out there, is conditional. So you might run a process and then, depending on the result, want to run an additional process and continue on, or do an analysis to see if the data is high enough quality and whatnot. And a lot of workflow management tools will allow you to just add that filtering step or a conditional step into the workflow before you proceed. So there are tons of patterns out there, and there are a lot of different ways to kind of think about workflows and why you might want to use them. So if you have what we refer to as embarrassingly parallel tasks, so something you just need to do 1,000 times, it's a pain in the butt, but that's where workflow management tools can be really helpful. It can also be really helpful if you need to cycle through a workflow. So if you are repeating it on a regular basis, or you need to repeat a step until some certain threshold is met, as with model trainings in machine learning, you would be able to have that be handled by the workflow manager instead of you sitting there and checking the results and restarting it if needed every time. They can also be really helpful in that they will allow for retry strategies and whatnot. So if you have code that you're not quite certain how much memory it will use, you can set up your workflow so that it's using your initial estimate, but if it fails with an out of memory error, it will retry that process with more memory the next time. So it can be really helpful for allowing you to retry against failures, or to resume a workflow partway through if you have an issue with one step. And it also allows you to have potentially many branches going on. So I've been working on a project recently where we have some training of machine learning models going on, and we're doing it across a bunch of different locations. So all of those create a specific job, create an individual job that's going on, but then there's a separate process to create the data that will compare all of those models against. And that can go on simultaneously. And then once all of those things are prepared, we're able to do analyses on the final data sets. So there's a lot of different options out there, and it really varies quite a bit. These are some examples of real world cases of workflows. So the one on the left here is working, I believe it was with Silk, to do some parallelization of climate modeling. So these are some of these steps are cycling back and forth, and you have conditionals going on to make certain thresholds are being met before the data continues on to the next step. And so this is all being handled automatically. The researcher doesn't need to trigger each of these steps or check how it's done before restarting a process. They're able to just leave it running in the background and come back and check on the results at the end. The same if you are, for example, again, running a bunch of machine learning models, you can basically set it up so that all of those models run, and once all of them are completed, then a final process to provide you with summary statistics of each of the models, or of all of the models together, is run only at the end. And then you can also end up with some pretty complicated workflows, especially in bioinformatics, where you're doing multiple steps to process data, and what needs to be processed and what software you're using might change quite a bit. And so this bottom example is an absolutely wild workflow, but it's taking a lot of advantage of containers to run dozens of different software options to run a complicated workflow that run manually takes many hours to just go through, wait for one step to finish before you can start the next one and proceed on. So there are quite a few workflow tools out there. Some of them are really quite simple. Things like using Slurm job arrays allows you to just spin up 1,000 of nearly identical tasks with changing a single input. But then there are a few other ones that can allow you to take advantage of some more complicated workflow patterns. So on MachWeka, we have Nextflow and SnakeMake, and are working on Silk. And then we also, out in the world, some people are using WDL, which I workflow domain language, I think, and common workflow language are two other tools out there. And I think that is the end of my slides on workflows. So really fast summary, there's a ton of details to get into with workflows, and what exactly you're going to use is going to depend on your specific tools and whatnot, but there's a lot of options out there and they're really useful for, again, improving your reproducibility. So we've gathered a few different case studies we have from REANS, Habit REANS for examples where containers and workflows were used to help improve research processes. So you can see this covers a pretty wide range of things from climate optimization to looking at molecular, like chemicals and their properties, and working on like material design. So it's a really wide range of things that can benefit from both containers and workflows. One exciting one going on right now that is soon to be published is a container being set up for doing some coupled global climate modeling. And we have a recently published one about using both containers and workflows to drive brain tumor research. So there are case study links and links to the full summary of case studies we have out there, but these are just kind of a few examples of containerizing or developing workflows in order to improve researcher capabilities and research reproducibility and portability. So how can REANS help? Well, as Jeff and I have both mentioned, there are some tools available on Mahuika at the moment. So Apptainer is default set up for you on Mahuika and is a great tool if you want to mess around with different software options and don't want to wait for us to try and build new software, or if you want to have specific settings for your software. And then we have a couple of workflow tools on Mahuika as well, SnakeMake and Nextflow. And we're also working on developing workshops for both containers and workflows in the near future. So keep your eyes open. There will be more information and some workshops coming up from both REANS and Genomics Aotearoa on workflows and containers. And then there's also the ability to work with our consultancies to work on developing workflows. So that's something I've been working on recently is some machine learning workflow development for a researcher. So with that, we were hoping to have plenty of time for you all to ask questions and to potentially get into some demos. So really, this is just a space for you guys to kind of discuss what you are most interested in and get more information. We wanted to give a really broad summary, but we can always dive down into the details now.